Hello, everyone. I hope you're keeping the best of health. My name is Rohan, and I would be the moderator for today's exciting event. I would firstly like to thank you for taking the time out to attend the EdTech Power Hour session hosted by Harbinger. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Power Hour is a series of interactive roundtable discussions amongst industry stalwarts where they would be sharing their experiences and insights on a particular topic. And the topic for today's discussion is artificial intelligence for augmenting skilling, reskilling, and upskilling. Before we begin, a quick few housekeeping tips. In case you cannot hear the audio, ensure you have selected the right speaker for audio output. You may test the same to see if it is working fine from the audio settings option on the lower left corner of your screen. And if necessary, please dial in using a phone. Now it's time for some introduction. Our host for today's roundtable is Rahul Singh. Rahul is a part of the Harbinger group and is passionate about helping organizations and leaders solve challenges around learner engagement and student outcomes through intervention of learning technologies. We welcome you, Rahul, and the stage is all yours.
Thank you very much, Rohan. First of all, good morning to everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us for this discussion. This is an hour-long event, but we would definitely want this to be an interactive session. We do have a Q&A session towards the end of this discussion, the last 15 minutes, but at any point of time during the discussion, if you have any thoughts, questions, please feel free to type in the chat box. And we'll take turns and we'll ensure that we answer your questions and engage with you in the conversation. All right, so let's get started with our discussion today. And what's our game plan for today? So these are the following points that we'll cover in our discussion today. We'll look at the skill gap challenges and the expectations that the industry has from EdTech providers. We'll also be looking at some solutions from EdTech providers that are helping bridging some of these skill gaps. Then we will be looking at an AI-enabled framework for implementing a skilling, reskilling, and upskilling ecosystem. And once we have looked at that framework, we will also look at some of the challenges that we need to overcome before we implement this AI-enabled framework. And with that, let me take the honor of introducing our panelists for the day. Our first panelist for the day is Maria. Good morning, Maria. How are you doing today?
Good morning. Doing great. Maybe good afternoon, good evening for some of you. Great to be here. I am with MHI, and I'm responsible for providing thought leadership, educational programming, talent, leadership development, and future talent recruitment for member companies of MHI. MHI is an international trade association for supply chain and material handling. Our 800 member companies manufacture products, offer services, and consulting for the supply chain industry. MHI produces 2 trade shows that some people may have heard of, ProMat and Modex, which are in the top 50 trade shows in the US. We have 17 industry groups, which are comprised of member companies that collaborate to provide solutions for the industry. We also administer 25 American national standards, with 2 new standards coming out this year. And MHI publishes the quarterly MHI Solutions magazine and the MHI annual report, which highlight trends and best practices, as well as focus on operational issues in areas such as workforce. In 2020, MHI merged with the Warehouse Education Research Council, also known as WORK, to provide education, events, and networking for practitioners in the industry. So that was a lot, but that gives you a snapshot that MHI is very entrenched in the supply chain and material handling industry.
Thank you very, very much, Maria, for this introduction and telling us about MHI. Once again, thank you very much for taking the time out for being with us on this panel discussion, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts on this particular topic. And with that, let me take the pleasure of introducing our second panelist for the day. We have Christoph with us. Hi, Christoph.
Hi, thanks a lot. I hope I trust you can see me and hear me.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So thanks a lot for having us here and introducing us. I'm Christoph, German by nationality, which is hard to deny if you listen to my strong accent. I'm very sorry about that. I'm one of the co-founders at SkillLab, where I'm responsible for the company's strategy. So real quick, what we do at SkillLab. The need we address at SkillLab was observed amongst the founding team really in 2015-16, which was a European refugee crisis, or what is known as the so-called refugee crisis. So what we observed as a problem in the labor market back then was quite significant. We couldn't understand why refugees and migrants struggled so much to find a job. So it was clear and obvious that something was in their way. Skilled people that came to Europe struggled so much to understand the opportunities available to them in the labor market, or to size opportunities, that really the question we ask ourselves was, why is it so? And can we use technology to change something about their situation? That's really where the idea of SkillLab was born. We started from the observation of that very concrete problem and then developed into a company over the years. Today, SkillLab operates its technology in 15 countries and serves employment and upskilling services as well as training institutions. So we build tools really for groups of job seekers that range from the unemployed to those in transition or in search of training and upskilling. What has not changed over all of these years is that we have a very strong belief that technology and especially AI can help people to express themselves and empower them, so to speak, to size opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christoph, for taking the time out for being on this panel discussion with us. I think using technology to bring difference in lives of people, that's a strong statement in itself. And I think all of us, some way or the other, get at a point, intersection points where we interact with technology and we leverage technology to ensure that we can have a better present and a better future. So looking forward to your thoughts, Christoph, in terms of what are some of the innovative stuff that SkillLab is doing in terms of the skilling, upskilling, reskilling, and especially for the marginalized workforce. Okay, so now moving ahead. So before we start picking up the brains of our experts here, Maria and Christoph, let's look at what is the need? Why do we need an AI-enabled skilling, reskilling, and upskilling ecosystem? What is it that is driving this need? So here are some data points, basically, from some of the research papers done that has been published. Number one, CEOs across industries rank investment in people as the #1 way to accelerate performance. In fact, they give preference to upskilling, reskilling people within their organization rather than hiring from outside. The second data point, which is driving the need. The research says the time it takes to close a skills gap through traditional training has increased by more than 10 times. In the last 4 to 5 years, I guess, it was probably around 3 to 4 days that it used to take to close on a certain skill gaps by using traditional training methodology. Now that's between the range of 36 to 40 days. That's a lot of money that we are talking about, a lot of dollar investment that we are talking about for closing on the skill gap. A recent survey was done wherein this research paper reached out to the L&D stakeholders, and they asked them that what is the desire, what is your wish list? 76% of L&D stakeholders said that AI is #1 on their wish list. It's the most desirable feature that they want in their learning platform. Another report by McKinsey says that 87% of the executives that were surveyed, they were experiencing skill gaps in the workforce. And these numbers, actually, if we start putting the numbers against these percentages, they're huge. They run into couple of 100 millions, those kind of numbers. So these data points and several other data points similar to this is driving the need of the AI for having an AI-enabled skilling, reskilling, upskilling ecosystem. Now, the good news is for all of us that this need is also throwing up a lot of opportunities, new opportunity areas. And here we have listed a few opportunity areas that if you start leveraging AI for skilling, reskilling, and upskilling initiatives, some of these opportunity areas can open up. You can implement a data-driven decision-making process in your organization. There's a lot of talk about unconscious bias. You can actually curb some of that or control some of that or cure some of that through data-driven decision-making. Economy of scale. In fact, later on in our discussion today, we'll look at one example wherein a skilling platform is using AI as a technology to ensure that it can reach an economy of scale. And of course, there are multiple such examples there. It fosters competency development. So it has been said that skills are the currency of future. But if you break down the skills further, the granular breakdown of skills is competencies. So this AI-enabled skilling, reskilling, upskilling ecosystem also fosters competency development. It can go up to the granular level. And last but not the least, in which the executives are, would be interested in, is it gives you a clear insight and analytics on a measurable return on investment. So that was about the need and the opportunity that's shaping up in the market. Now we have Maria with us, and she's from one of the leading associations in the US, which has a tremendous sizable workforce and members associated with them. So let's hear from Maria and ask her that, are you experiencing skill shortage in your industry? Can you throw some light on that, please?
Yes, well, as you can imagine, COVID has completely changed the landscape for supply chain. And it's obviously made it very relevant to everyone how important the supply chain is. So there's kind of two dynamics going on. One is there is definitely a shortage of gap for talent with technical skills. So industrial and mechanical engineering, software design and software programming, those are key skills that our member companies are looking for, and just in the supply chain industry. They're also looking for technicians and employees with very strong technical skills that are able to service equipment and repair. So those are also shortages. One of the things that happens is obviously there's the other side of this spectrum where then with automation and robotics, jobs are going away. So it's both that looking for those very specific skills and then having some of the work be automated where the jobs are no longer there. There is still this other gap around warehouse employees, and definitely having those employees that help create the last mile in the supply chain. So drivers, warehouse workers, obviously just knowing Amazon is hiring all the time tells you that there's still a huge gap in the workforce. One of the things that MHI does is they publish the MHI annual report, and that's in partnership with Deloitte each year, where they look at the top trends that are happening in the market and some of the burning platforms for industry executives. What happens every year is talent is always in that top 4 trends. They are always looking to how they find that great talent, how they retain that great talent. And as you notice over on the chart on the right, artificial intelligence is going to increase even more. So this was for 2020. Our 2021 report will be coming out in April. And those are going to be the same types of trends. But one of the things that the companies in supply chain material handling have identified is the steps to cover that talent shortage. Reskilling is really a key step to take, because employees are already working within the company. They know the products and services, they know the company culture. So taking those extra steps to reskill employees to continue to be ready to move with the future is far more cost effective than going outside and looking for talent.
Thank you, Maria, very much for this. In the chat box, my colleague would have shared the links. These reports are available on the web. free of cost. If you're interested, you can download them and experience them. I think the key over here, the point that Maria mentioned, where I would like to reiterate the fact is, we are hearing it today from an industry leader that reskilling and upskilling is far more cost effective as compared to hiring from outside. So that kind of testifies the statement that, why do we need an AI-enabled skilling, reskilling, upskilling ecosystem? Thank you, Maria, for sharing these insights. Okay. So, right. So, Christoph, you are a product leader. You have a product which leverages AI, and we'll come to that part later as to how you leverage AI in your product. And you're also, very interestingly, there's a social cost, social angle associated in the way you are using technology. That's, you are helping the marginalized workers. What is, as a stakeholder, what is your take on skill gap? What's happening out there?
Thanks a lot for the question, Rahul. And it sounds like a very simple one, but I think in fact we all agree it's very much not. So one of the things really to think about when speaking about the skills gap is what is a gap? So it's important to remember that a gap can only be defined in regard to something. So that means a person's abilities, including their skills and the task or opportunity at hand, must be expressed on the level of skills in the very first place. So if you want to identify a delta, so to speak, you need a mapping of the status quo in a very first place. Another important question is, and that's we see as a company in that space very much underestimated in what it really takes, is identify what a skill is. So what constitutes a skill? If you define a skill in a closed or even open ecosystem, you need to agree on a certain taxonomy. That means it must be clear what a skill is and what that exactly means. And in many instances also how a certain skill is called or named for that matter. So it can be really difficult to define this. At SkillLab, we use frameworks, for example, that comply with, say, national requirements, governmental requirements in the European Union or other countries. However, at the company level, there might be skills which are not addressed in, say, public taxonomies. So maybe there's a situation where only 20 people in the world know a certain skill that relates to a certain machine, or there's so many sort of exceptions to this that it needs to be very, very clear that defining a taxonomy is one of the key, say, ingredients if you want to define skill gaps. A skill gap in that definition there will only be defined also on the personal level. So I know we all do this and we have to really sort of draw conclusions on the meta level, but it's problematic to speak of a skill gap in general.
Yeah.
So in fact, there are many small skill gaps and they are all individual. So generally, if, say, the skills for the individual and the task at hand are clearly defined, there are two options. So someone should or want to be placed elsewhere where their skills fit better at the task at hand. Or the other option is that someone sees themselves in regard to a changing task or job. And that's, I think, what Maria mentioned earlier in this scenario, where you see the task you've been doing is changing, requiring new skills, additional skills. And that's really where education comes in, so to speak. With education, it's very similar. We strongly believe there is no more one size fits all in, for example, education to address skill gaps. But education needs to be much more personalized as a precondition to be able, so to speak, to address the situation. As a reference, something I find very striking is when you speak to modern education providers these days, you find out that whereas, say, a couple of years ago, they had maybe 100 courses to choose from, these days they have thousands of smaller learning modules which can be placed in certain sequences to really increase, say, the ultimate learning outcome for the individual. So in short, really, I think there's obviously no skill gap, although we all use that term and need to keep on using it, but there's many small individual skill gaps, which are always relative. And we do believe that there will be many more skill gaps to identify and bridge with the help of say, relevant education in the near future. The changing nature of the labor market almost makes upskilling a necessity really to keep people in employment.
Right. Thank you, Christoph, for sharing your thoughts on that. In fact, we do have a question from our audience, and that's probably some of it. A portion of that question is in line with what we discussed just right now. I think the couple of things that I heard from you, Christoph, sounds very interesting, is defining taxonomies. So that's kind of a stepping stone when we have to implement an AI-enabled ecosystem. And this taxonomies also ensure the scalability, the economy of scale that we can leverage. And the second one is the personalized education, or rather I should say nowadays it's hyper-personalized education, wherein, that's the need of the hour. So I'll just read out the question, and, we can answer a portion of that question now, and a remaining portion, I think we can take it towards the end of it, but it's your call. If you feel that, we have the answer to the complete question, you can answer that. So the question is, how far down the line do you think economy of scale would be achieved given investment needed in data quality, training data for an AI, and the expertise and resources needed for implementing AI subsets?
It's a very, very good question, and if I knew the answer, so I think it depends. That's something which you hear a lot by people who work with the issue. One of the, say, challenges we see in that space of taxonomies that emerge is you have public taxonomies. In the United States, you have ONET. In the European Union, you have ESCO. The Australian government is doing things. Singapore has leading taxonomies. They bring the big advantage that they are universal taxonomies. So various, say, institutions use these taxonomies, draw these taxonomies, and on the base of this, you can leverage, say, ecosystem dynamics. So you can, so to speak, plug and play various services that speak the same language, as in refer to the same taxonomy. In the context of organizations, I think it's a matter of the scale you can reach within that organizations. Is it worth developing your own taxonomy? Is the organization and the scalability within that organization big enough to say we do it from the scratch, we build up our own thing? Do you need connection points to the outside world, or is it enough, so to speak, to connect the dots within that ecosystem? I think that's a very, very important question everybody should ask themselves when setting something up. And the other question really is when it comes to personalization of education. I think it's similar to that degree, as in, do you want to go down sort of and do the work of labeling education, developing education for very specific use cases, or do you want to draw from a, say, wider market and pool of existing education, or is there even hybrid scenarios? Again, it unfortunately depends, so to speak, on the context a lot. But it's a good question. It's one of the key questions I think we should all ask ourselves.
Absolutely, and thank you, Christoph, for that. And I think when we look at the framework, the AI-enabled framework, I think some of these questions can be addressed. I think what we heard from Christoph is, in an organizational setting, what is the scale that you need? That is something which we can decide beforehand, before we go about implementing, and those decisions will dictate how much do we need in terms of resources and money. So we'll come to that. This is definitely very interesting question. Thank you very much for putting that up. So now let's move ahead in our discussion. And okay, so the next one that I have is for Maria. So Maria, I wanted to take your opinion on, so you heard about these things like, the taxonomy and all the good things about the technology, right? But at the front end, as a leader, what matters to you is results. What you see in terms of how so in that aspect, in addressing skill shortage in your industry, if given a choice, what expectations would you have from EdTech providers?
Well, that's a great question. And the first thing that I would recommend to companies is to be able to break down what exactly is the technology, what is AI, what are they implementing, because that's a big topic. And for companies who may not be familiar with it or don't understand all the pieces of it, I think it's going to be really important to break that down into language that people understand. One area I would, as an example is Grammarly, right? So people are using Grammarly, and Grammarly just started to offer Grammarly for Business, right? So now companies are using an AI tool and they're tracking how their employees are responding in email or writing. And that's an example to, very low level, but example to companies of you're already using AI and this is what it looks like and this is how it's helpful. And here's some of the things that are in preparation for it. The second thing is, as I was writing the article around reskilling and upskilling and the technologies involved for the MHI Solutions magazine, what I found was actually pretty surprising. It's really, companies are actually not ready for AI yet. There's so many things that they have to have streamlined. They need to have a lot of their manual processes streamlined. They need to have the tools in place. Again, COVID brought this urgency around digital transformation, and many companies weren't ready. In the supply chain industry, a third of warehouses operate still on paper. So they aren't ready to move to digital. So it's going to be important to work with companies to help them recognize where they need to do in that pre-work and getting ready, getting their processes online, streamlining things. Because once you're in the middle of that implementation and you're working with them and bringing AI and doing that training, people need to be available to help support the employees. And that's where the managers come in. So they can't be spending time filling out paperwork, doing work schedules, all those types of things. They have to be out there on the floor coaching and supporting their employees as they're working on reskilling and upskilling. So it's definitely a change agent kind of role for companies, helping them understand what the technology is, helping them understand how it's going to progress, always communicating that message of the benefits of all the work, because there is work involved. And, it doesn't happen overnight. So, helping companies recognize that. But both of those activities of streamlining processes and then also bringing in AI to reskill and quickly upskill employees is going to create a better experience and meaningful work for employees. So it's worth it. And so that's part of it too, is helping them recognize the value at the end.
Right. And I would, totally agree with that, streamlining the processes, the prerequisites, it's not something which can be implemented overnight. So it's not like the stakeholder decides that, okay, we need to implement an AI-enabled ecosystem. We look at 5 vendors and we go choose the best one and we go about implementing one. There's a lot of pre-work that needs to happen, and that involves a lot of change management as well. And I think the Grammarly example that you gave, Maria, that's superb. I had read somewhere that the technology should be like second nature. If you have to spend time in understanding the technology, probably it's not solving the purpose. It has to be second nature, and you shouldn't even realize that what kind of technology that you're using to a certain extent at that level, and simplifying the language, breaking down the components. So what do we need to do if we chose AI as a technology to drive this initiative? What do we have to do? Breaking it down. And I think some of it we'll look at in the framework that we'll talk about later. So, but thank you. Those were very insightful thoughts, Maria. Right. So now we turn to Christoph, and Christoph, we would like to understand from you in terms of how is SkillLab leveraging AI? Just to kind of go back to Maria's thoughts in terms of the organizations, institutes, or the bodies that are using your tool platform, what kind of prerequisites do they have to take care of before they implement this technology?
Great, thanks a lot. And maybe let me start explaining how we use AI. So, I mean, it's needless to say that there's many ways of using AI and where AI could be useful in various contexts. What we do at SkillLab is we help users to capture and express their skills. So that sounds very simple at first, maybe, but it's in fact quite complex. If I was to ask you or anyone, and including myself, what are your skills? Most people would really struggle to come up with something. So most likely it will be very broad, like my skills are management and strategy, but what does that really mean? I have no idea myself. So if the information you send, if assuming you understand it yourself, is there, it's absolutely problematic to assume that the same information or what you mean with it is being sort of received or decoded by someone else in the similar fashion. We have that same problem on the level of occupations. So what does it mean that someone was a key account manager or a waiter for that matter? So two people sharing the same title might have had completely different experiences in terms of skills. So the only mechanism, say, in the real world to compensate this information deficit, which leads to lots of inaccuracy, is things like networks or, say, brands on a CV. That is also not very accurate, and most importantly, we think it's discriminating people in the labor market. So what we do at SkillLab is using AI to interview users through roughly 14,000 skills we have in our database, and the AI helps to shorten the interview process and personalize it. So we use machine learning algorithms really to shorten the experience, so to speak, of indicating which skills a person has are most relevant. So in fact, people can do this during a couple of minutes using our app, for example, on a mobile phone or on their way to work, or wherever they see sort of the situation fits the most. Nobody could ever sit down and answer 14,000 questions, or in some cases even more. So that's really where we see a very strong use case for AI. If you leave behind this idea of assuming skills from a title, or say the static idea of a questionnaire to assess someone of the level of skills, you also learn a lot by letting people freely interact with a solution. So for example, you learn that some skills which are relevant to say a business occupation or task can indeed come from experiences like someone taking care of their kids or having been coaching a sports team. So users as well as employers can see which skills exist, where they come from, and how they can best be used, so to speak, in a defined context. You might also learn that, for example, if you use it the technology at scale, so to speak, say that waiters in big cities tend to have a lot of skills which are classically located in the tourism domain. So this is a very obvious example, so to speak, but AI really learns every day and allows us to address more accurate and relevant questions. And depending on the context, you can draw really powerful insights from the use of AI. Once you have a detailed skill profile of someone, you can do a lot of things. You can match to a job, to a task, to a profile. You can calculate gaps and recommend, for example, learning modules to bridge a certain gap between where you are and where you want to be more effectively. So lots of options you have once sort of the status quo is assessed, and that's really what we focus on at SkillLab.
Right, that's great, and it sounds like, you know, it could be you know, the SkillLab would probably fit in the first phase of this ecosystem, or first you know, container of this ecosystem, which is more about helping people identify what skills do they have, what competencies do they have. So thank you very much, Christoph, for sharing this. Okay, so now let's move ahead in our discussion. Let me do a quick look on the chat part of it. And okay, so there's one interesting question, and that's on warehouses, Maria. So 1/3 of the warehouses are still on paper. Can management justify jumping over broken systems and spending resources on career dev? Return on information over return on individual is the struggle. Is that a case? Maria, I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's a very cliche statement that people have.
I'm so sorry. I was on mute, so apologize. So I think it's a really hard question for companies. It's probably at an individual level. When I think about our member companies, they really have to think about what's the roadmap down the road. I think when you think about COVID and what that put companies in the place there where they hadn't thought about their processes and then suddenly they were scrambling, it's forced companies to think more around what are the risks, what are the implications of sitting on something and not doing it. I think it's going to be a balance. And it's probably in partnership where you're working both on the career development and you're improving processes. And those go hand in hand because employees need to be a part of that. So I don't think I have the magical answer there, but I think there's a lot of repercussions for companies not to address those processes, but also keeping employees in the loop where they're moving with that technology as they're implementing it.
Right. And thank you, Maria, for taking that question. I think some of the questions and the thoughts that we are getting from the audience is towards the prerequisites thing, the preparation part of it. Even before we go about implementing this AI-enabled ecosystem, what all needs to be done, and questions around scalability. So, and we will address some of those when we look at the framework in terms of how we can make a framework or how we can use this framework in a manner which is best suited to your organization's needs. And this is a good time for us to take a look at that. So, this is the AI-enabled framework for skilling, reskilling, and upskilling that we are looking at. So basically, what we are saying is there are 5 key components of this ecosystem. Where it starts from is the first starting point is, of course, after the prerequisites. Hypothetically, for a moment, let's assume that the prerequisites are done and the ground is ready to implement this ecosystem. Where it has to start from? It has to start from the competency matrix. So any particular organization, and for our discussion per se, let's take a warehouse. Let's take Amazon as an example. If they had to deliver the last mile promise, and they have to ensure that the drivers that they hire, because they have to hire in thousands, and they do not have the capacity or the capability or the time, rather, more than capacity and capability, they do not have the time to train those thousands of new hired on Amazon's culture and values. So the brand promise is at stake. So what do we do? Now, an organization like Amazon, if we assume, would have a competency matrix. They would have defined that our drivers should reflect XYZ type of behaviors. Organizations, and not just Amazon, we would rather say that every organization would have these listed somewhere. In some organizations, it could be stored in a sophisticated, complex software application. In some organizations, it could be on paper. So the idea is that if you as an organization have this competency, data around competency, or if you have listed out the skills that you want to see in your employees at any certain place, so that's the starting point. You have the competency matrix, and then we move on to the second component, that's the performance data. So there are various systems, various applications, there are various ways through which performance data is captured. I'm not using the term measured specifically. I'm just focusing on the term captured. So performance data is captured in multiple ways in a typical organization. So it could be an application which your manager uses to, capture your performance data. It could be a 360-degree feedback form that is rolled out to your peers, supervisors, and subordinates, and they give you feedback on that, on your certain competencies. It could be your annual KRAs, key responsibility areas. If you're in the sales domain, it could be your sales quota, your CRM details. If you're in the warehouse department, then the matrix associated with performance in the warehouses. So what happens is, in the current environment, this performance data is getting captured in silos, in multiple software applications, in multiple systems, in multiple formats. What we have to do is we have to work around this and ensure that we create a central location where all this data, which is captured, performance data, which is captured, is transferred in a particular way. And this data is now presented in a standardized manner. You know, in the tech terms, we would call it data modeling. So you prepare the data in a manner in which the AI can read it. And then you run that data, performance data, against the desired competency matrix. And that's where you identify the competency gaps. Once you have identified the competency gaps, and those competency gaps could be, were you able to deliver the last mile promise? Was the customer satisfied? You know, do you have communication skills while working remotely with your colleagues? So those kind of, you know, not the broad level ones, like, are you good at management? Are you good at leadership? Are you good at sales? What Christoph was referring to earlier. So at a granular level. So once you have identified the competency matrix, then what we need to do is we need to provide training, learning, skilling, upskilling, reskilling. In a typical organization, there would be a variety of sources through which you can train, educate, coach your people, your employees. You could have a learning management system, which is having, you know, tons of e-learning courses, which are pretty custom to your organization. You could have a subscription to a content library like SkillSoft, where you have, you know, thousands of courses available. And then there's open educational resources, like you have YouTubes or blog sites or, you know, research papers, everything out there. Now, what we need to do, how we can leverage AI. So there's a lot of this learning resources available. So now the learner, the employee, is aware of their competency gaps, but what they need to do to cover up that competency gap, that is where AI will come into picture again. So AI can go and, based on the competency gaps identified, can identify the right type of content in that plethora of content, can identify the right pieces and put a customized, or a, you know, as we were talking about, a hyper personalized learning pathway or a career pathway. And we'll look at one such example wherein a skilling platform is doing this. We'll look at that example. So now we have the learning and the career pathway set up by using AI. Then what do? We are working remotely. Probably for some more time, we'll continue working that. And we are never, you know, probably not going to come back to normal. So the peer-to-peer learning, the water cooler moments are not happening. So do we leave the learner, the employee alone? What do they do? So we need to provide them continuous support. Now, this is where, again, we can leverage AI. So we can have an AI-enabled smart bot, which is integrated in an office productivity tool like Microsoft Teams, Slack, or Skype. And this virtual coach is available for that particular individual. So this virtual coach has been trained, this virtual coach, the smart bot has been trained, and it knows that, you know, I'm coach for individual XYZ. This individual has certain competency gaps. This individual is going through this recommended learning pathway. And at any point of time, he or she can come back to me and ask questions, and I will guide him or her in the right direction. So a virtual coach guiding in the entire journey. And we'll look at one such example. And then the last one is you complete the loop. So as an organization, you decide that, you know, for how many period of months, maybe 6 months or a year, you want to implement this framework, you know, run this cycle. And at the end of it, you go and close the loop. And that's where you can use AI. So you can, you know, use AI to evaluate a particular learner, particular employee, and figure out where they are as compared to where they were 6 months back or 12 months back in terms of competency gaps. Have they moved ahead? Is there a delta, a positive delta or a negative delta? And based on that, we repeat the cycle again. So this kind of a, you know, a framework for an AI-enabled skilling, reskilling, upskilling ecosystem. And organizations which are paper-based, It's not, that complex to set up this particular structure. And the good news with AI is that you can scale it up for a number of people. So I'll just take a pause here, and I'll just request from the audience if there's any specific thoughts, questions, comments on this particular framework. Right. So let's move ahead, and we'll please feel free to type in your questions later as well. There's one question, and probably I'll read out the question. Let's make an attempt to answer this. Can AI help with legislated requirements for training? Christoph, would you be able to share any thoughts around that?
I must be very honest. I'm not fully sure. That might be due to my limited English knowledge. I'm not sure what legislated requirements for training means exactly. So before I answer that question, if you could give me a pointer on this, that would help me a lot.
Right. So I'll probably request the audience to type in their thoughts. Yeah. So the definition for legislated is defined by law or legislation. So would it be fair to say governed by federal regulations, more of compliance kind of training?
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Patrick. I'm just seeing the definition. So can AI help with the requirements for training? I mean, at SkillLab, I can only tell from our experience, we're looking into this question of, say, formal training versus informal training versus, say, certified or degree relevant training versus learning on the job question a lot. And I really do think the complexity is a legal one, but it's also a technical one. So in fact, we are looking at this issue from a country to country base, and we're still learning. So we haven't found, say, the absolute answer, because in some countries the complexity is really enormous. You need, maybe for a certain office position, you need a certain fire certificate training, which you have been doing a couple of years ago, and you didn't. So there is really so many use cases that we are at SkillLab looking at this really at the country level. That's and even on the country level, there is sort of, it really depends on the availability of resources. So in some instances, we have good information provided by governments or trade unions or other sort of representatives that we can use and draw from. In other instances, again, these things are not so available to us, and we really need to sort of deep dive into understanding what the requirements might be. But it's unfortunately not an easy task for, say, a company to get the data. So using it once it's there is the easier bit, and AI can, obviously it can be incorporated as a source of data, but getting this data is quite tricky, we found.
Right. Thank you, Christoph, for sharing your thoughts on that. So we'll move ahead, and I'll just do a quick time check. I have like 12 minutes in hand. So we'll plan out the next part of the conversation accordingly. So turning back to Maria. So Maria, in your opinion, right? We said that, competency framework is the competency matrix is the starting point if you have all the prerequisites done. In your opinion, what is the starting point for implementing an AI-enabled skilling framework? What basic things the organization should have in place before they think about this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it goes again back to the people. There really needs to be an understanding across the organization of what the skills are and what the gaps are. And with that, I think, companies need to be more collaborative and transparent on where their skills are in each different group. And that often doesn't happen with companies. And so it's going to really take companies an opportunity to come together, and maybe they have steering committees where they're collaborating on what are the skills that are common across different organizations, different functions. What are the skills that they see are gaps, so that those can be identified as sort of your top 10 list. The other thing is, in addition to the collaboration, the people side is really, are you preparing your HR and your L&D groups for the technology and for the change? And a lot of times these are organizations, groups in the organizations that don't get necessarily all the funding or the direction there. And that's going to be really key. They are leading the charge. So they're going to need the tools in place. They're going to need the technology, virtual reality, augmented reality, to have those platforms in place for this rapid reskilling. And then I think it's, as a talent development professional and change management, I think about like how my role will be changing. I'm no longer facilitating training, I'm facilitating change, and I'm becoming a coach for talent. And so that's something to get your hands around too, is that your role is changing and you're really guiding people and coaching people through that reskilling and upskilling.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria. I think I've just made a note of that sentence that you said. You're no longer facilitating trainings, you're facilitating change. I think the bigger prerequisite is a lot of things the technology can take care of, and we can scale it up, scale it down based on the availability of the resources and the funding. But a lot of it is around the change management, this entire mindset of adopting this new technology. Thank you very much. That's a powerful statement, Maria. Thank you. So, Christoph, coming to you, if you could just tell us briefly in terms of what are some of those challenges that we foresee while we get into the implementation mode of this AI-enabled ecosystem? Is it about the accuracy of data, or the way we capture the data, with the way we model the data? What is it?
I think it's a good question. And if I can only make a few general observations, a lot of things are case specific, but what we see as a key question really that should be addressed when it comes to implementation is this use case, is the problem, the challenge really best addressed with AI? Obviously, I think that's also what Maria mentioned earlier. It must be really clear that the use of technology addresses a certain need. The other thing, which I think also we covered earlier, is that in implementing AI means having data available to work with and having sort of the right structure. If that data includes user data, what you need to take into consideration is that if you want user data and if you want users to give you data, you also need good products, like with many other things in say end user facing products. So you should not forget to heavily invest in UX and UIs. It doesn't change just because it's powered by AI, so to speak. What is really, really important also when working with users and asking users for the data, for indications, for participating, so to speak, is people must understand what they are asked to do, and they must understand why and how AI is being used in that solution. So it's very, very, I want to say, fundamental when it comes to the implementation bit, assuming it's user facing, that there's a high level of transparency in regard to the user and the people which share their data. So a person must know, is the data indicate here an assessment? Am I being tested? Is it a self-exploratory exercise? Who's seeing my data? Do I share it with someone? These questions are really, really crucial when it comes to implementing. So at SkillLab, for example, normally users own the data and they actively, so to speak, consent to share their data with external parties if they understand what this data will help these organizations to do. And that should be in their very own interest. And yeah, it's clear to be transparent. Lastly, technology is being distributed to people by people. And what we see when it comes to implementation is that you really need to train those people who distribute and administer, so to speak, AI-based solutions. If, say, the staff, the people on the ground you work with have certain reservations or hesitations when it comes to using the tool because it says AI or they don't understand it fully, you create a certain problem in the implementation part. And I can only recommend really in such an instance to heavily invest into training the trainers modules and make sure everybody feels comfortable. And yeah, just because it says AI doesn't mean we're not human anymore. And that's a key thing to consider, really.
Right. No, absolutely, Christoph, and thank you very much. That's very insightful. I think a few years back, somewhere I had read that, there was an article that said that, data is the new oil, something like that. And I was like, by that time, by the way, WhatsApp was not as big as what it is today. And I thought that, how can data be as big as oil? But, it makes sense today. I can connect the dots here. Data is the key thing. And the way we use it also is very important. So we have to take care of all those things that the data is used in the best possible manner. All right, so thank you very much. That's very interesting. So now we'll just take a look at, we'll take a moment and we'll look at a few examples here. So when we're talking about the AI-based skilling framework, we'll try to look at these examples and we'll try and fit them in the various components, in the various containers that we spoke about. So for example, something like SkillLab can fit into the competency gap container, identifying the competency gaps workflow. There's this product called skimthrough.ai. This has been developed by Harbinger. What this product does is it leverages the power of AI to generate theme clouds from closed caption YouTube videos to drive core learning concepts. In simple terms, there's so much video-based content available there. But do we have the time in the world to go through all those videos? For example, there's a 20-minute video, but only 3 minutes or 4 minutes of that video, which are not in continuity. It's like sporadic. 1 minute at the beginning, 1 minute in the middle, and 1 minute at the end. So how do I get to those specific certain section points? So this particular product tool creates those tag themes through which you can go to those specific areas, it can drive the core learning concepts. The website link would have been shared by my colleague in the chat box. We're in the beta stages of this product. The website might not be available today. Just stay tuned. It might get up in a next day or two. The second product that I wanted to call out here today is Sophos.ai. So Sophos.ai, it's a hyper-personalized AI-powered workplace training via conversational microlearning. So something like Sophos.ai would fit into the continuous support section. So we spoke about the AI-enabled smartbot, chatbot. So a platform or an application like Sophos.ai will put in there, and skimthrough.ai could be in the recommended learning pathways and the continuous support as well. It can fit in both those components. The next one is skillnet.net. What it does, it uses taxonomies to measure skills and drives upskilling, reskilling programs through personalized development plans. We have a video, a short video bite, 45 seconds video bite from the CEO of this organization, Mike Kritzman, and I'll just quickly share that for all of us to take a quick look at it. And I'm just swapping my screen, so you should see a new screen at your end at any point of time now. It's up here. So Mike recorded this video for us, and I'll just play this for us.
Hi, it's Mike Kritzman. I'm the founder and CEO at skillnet.net. We're a learning technology platform with a focus on skill measurement and powering upskilling and reskilling programs. Our focus related to artificial intelligence is two legs so far. One is related to content curation and doing the skill tagging, which can be a heavy lift manually. The other relates to powering personalization and the specific upskilling programs that are appropriate for users based on their skill assessments. Getting the right content for each user is something that we're currently doing very well with the machine. Be happy to talk further. Thanks for your interest in skillnet.net. Thanks.
Right, so that was a video from Mike. This particular SkillNet, this particular platform can fit into the, the recommended learning pathways, the content curation part of it, and the skill tagging. There was a question initially that we had from our audience in terms of on the scalability part of it. So if you just have to, tag the content pieces within your organization as per the skills or the desired competencies, if it's done manually, it's just too much of a task. The next one that we are looking at is Trillions. This is again a product by Harbinger. It's an artificial intelligence powered platform for creating questions in 4 simple steps. in very simple terms, and I'll just show you a quick video here, and my colleague would have shared a YouTube video link as well. You can look at it at your own convenience. In very simple terms, what it does is you put in a lot of raw data, from one side of this application, the content, and then what it does is it uses the AI and machine learning algorithm backend, and it generates assessments in volumes. So something which cannot be handled in a, so just a moment here, my screen is getting stuck. Yeah, here we are. So let's look at it.
Hi there. Welcome to Quillions, world's first AI-powered platform for building questions, quizzes, and assessments. Quillions harnesses the power of artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms to create the right questions from your training or teaching material within seconds. Creating questions has never been this easy. I'll show you how it works.
Right, thank you. Just for the interest of the time, we you can review the video later on through the YouTube link. Okay, so these were some of the examples, and something like Quillions can fit in the evaluation part, wherein you need to generate assessments and assessments in terms of high volumes. So how do we do that? So I know we are on the top of the hour. We will just do one quick slide. We'll just summarize here in terms of the key takeaways. So what did we look at today? So the key takeaways, we looked at the 5 components of an AI-enabled skilling ecosystem. The components are the competency matrix, performance data, learning or career pathways, continuous support for the learners, and the evaluation, closing the loop. Then the next one is preparing the ground for adoption of AI-based technology is a prerequisite. We need to be change agents. We need to facilitate the change, as Maria said. And then the third key takeaway, data is the key driver for the AI-enabled skilling ecosystem. Data is the most important component in this entire scheme of things. So these were some of the key takeaways from this discussion. Once again, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, Maria. Thank you so much for taking the time out for this and sharing this insights. It's really helpful to hear from an industry leader that, what are exactly we experiencing on the ground. And so thank you for your time today, Maria.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
And Christoph, thank you so very much for taking out the time for this discussion from your schedule and sharing some of the thoughts and some of the great work that SkillLab is doing. We wish you all the best for your future endeavors and your future assignments and the social cause that you are servicing.
Pleasure was mine. Thanks a lot for having us here.
So Rohan, I know kind of run through the stipulated time, but still I'll hand it over to you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much, Rahul. And thank you to our panelists for a wonderful discussion. And I'm sure we all are going back with some food for thought today. And I would also like to thank our viewers for joining in this session through Zoom as well as through LinkedIn. And trust me, you've been a great audience tonight. In the meanwhile, if anyone from our audience would have more questions or would like to reach out to our panelists, please feel free to drop a line at hsinfo@harbingergroup.com. Thank you once again, everyone. Take care and have a great one.